Davide Soliani has left Ubisoft, and the question everyone needs answering is, where is he going next? Will the genius creator of the Mario plus Rabbids duology be free to move closer to Nintendo's orbit, and could he even join the Big N himself? To understand the likelihoods associated with this, we will need to look at a few different aspects. Firstly, we'll need to understand Davide Soliani's history as a game developer and the history of the Mario plus Rabbids games. Secondly, we will need to look at Nintendo's history in these sorts of situations where big-name developers leave the studios that made them. And finally, we'll need to assess the whole game scene. Along the way, we will also look at the implications for the Mario plus Rabbids franchise itself. So, let's start at the beginning. Davide has a very long connection to Ubisoft, joining back in 1997, and he has credits on a large number of games, including, of course, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle and Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. His relationship with Shigeru Miyamoto seems to have blossomed when, in 2015, Miyamoto witnessed a pitch from the Ubisoft team on what was to become Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Miyamoto-san was so impressed with what they had produced that he wondered how they had managed to get their hands on Mario's character models. However, the developers had no character models to hand. It was purely their love and attention to detail that made such a faithful rendition of Mario possible. The trust having already been built, Nintendo gave Ubisoft an incredible degree of freedom to take their mustachioed mascot in directions that were previously inconceivable, having him wield massive guns, interact with phone-touting wisecrackers, and crossing over with the not universally beloved Rabbids franchise. The first game, Kingdom Battle, was certainly a critical hit, with its incredibly well-designed strategy battles making a splash in August 2017 during a relative lull in the Switch's otherwise very robust first year. In an E3 that boasted reveals of Metroid Prime 4 and the first hints of a Switch Pokémon, the Ubisoft revelation the following day, a separate day from the Nintendo's June Direct, still made headlines and drew attention, not least because in true Nintendo style, the hype cycle was very short, with barely 2 months before the game's release. With a Metacritic score of 85 and a lot of press touting the strong relationship between Soliani and Miyamoto, the game had a very positive launch despite its rather unusual approach. However, while Nintendo maintained their prices and the strength of their brands long term, barely ever dropping their games in price, Kingdom Battle could soon be found for sums a fraction of the recommended retail price, and I'm personally sure that the presence of a very cheap Mario title on the market compared to all the other full price ones would have contributed to a very high final sales tally for Kingdom Battle. GameRant estimates that 10 million copies of Kingdom Battle were sold. That number is eyebrow-poppingly high for a Super Mario RPG, especially a niche one like a tactics game featuring the Rabbids, but when the game was very often sold for that tiny sum, perhaps it's not so surprising. But Ubisoft were mistaken if they thought that a sequel would be successful purely because of the hype from the first title, a plum Christmas window launch, and what appears to be a vastly improved budget, as well as a generous 5-year development cycle. Yves Guillemot, co-founder and chief executive officer of Ubisoft, said in a statement of its financial targets the following month, "Despite excellent ratings and players' reception as well as an ambitious marketing plan, we were surprised by Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope's underperformance in the final weeks of 2022 and early January." Well, I'm not sure I was as surprised. For one thing, as Nintendo apparently had already advised them, doing 2 of the same types of games on one system always risked the second game selling less well, and so this was something Nintendo generally avoided. We can see this even with highly popular and acclaimed games such as Super Mario Galaxy 2 and, perhaps, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. As Guillemot admitted, I think it was a different issue with Mario. We had already released a Mario Rabbids game on Switch, so by doing another one we had 2 similar experiences on one machine. On Nintendo, games like this never die. There are 25 Mario games on Switch. Nintendo advised that it's better to do one iteration on each machine. We were a bit too early. We should have waited for the next console. But beyond that, my hunch is that the title was launching at a full price into a far more saturated market when its predecessor had essentially juiced its own numbers by doing deep discount sales early on. Anyone interested in Mario + Rabbids did the logical thing and waited, and sure enough, the price soon dropped off a cliff. I also personally didn't rate Sparks of Hope nearly as highly as Kingdom Battle, despite the slicker presentation overall, although different people may have different views on this, and it didn't affect the strong Metacritic score. Now, Sparks of Hope continued to have DLC, with the final pack launching in August 2023. While Kingdom Battle's DLC doubled down on the Mario connection with a heavy emphasis on Donkey Kong, it's notable that the second game's DLC focused more on the Ubisoft cast, with Rayman featuring, and my hunch is that Ubisoft felt compelled after the first game, and perhaps even more motivated after the release of the second, to try to convert their newly found Nintendo followers into not just Mario fans who are experimenting with the Ubisoft game, but also into Ubisoft fans themselves. Whether that worked or not is not entirely clear. Sparks of Hope has still achieved over 3 million in sales, but given the game was received as a flop, and given the generally parlous state of Ubisoft's financial position, with the company having reportedly laid off 1,700 people in the previous financial year, it could be imagined that the Mario + Rabbids team were not facing the kind of joyful victory lap that they received in the glory days of 2017, but were facing a much tougher set of questions internally. Personally, if a Mario RPG sells 3 million copies and is still regarded as a flop, I see that as a failure of expectations management. Paper Mario the Origami King sold in that ballpark over the last 4 years, and with a much longer established franchise, and with a launch during a pandemic. So why Ubisoft thought their spin-off would realistically sell more than that, I can't imagine, except for greed, insularity, and a little dose of stupidity. Nintendo is famously incredibly cautious and tough in its sales projections. They might consider a lot of games disappointments even if they sell very well. Perhaps even Tears of the Kingdom has not yet met their hopes, although there's no way they're likely to stay either way. But it seems to me they would never go public as pursuing such ostentatious numbers as these. Now, under normal circumstances, a year on from the development of a new set of DLC, you would expect Davide Soliani to be beginning the development of his next title. A year is a good period of time for prototyping, for pitching, and for securing approval for his next game. Nobody criticises his work in all of this. The Metacritic score of 85 matches Kingdom Battle, and while some of the changes weren't to my personal taste, I'm an Advance Wars fan, so what do I know about making games that appeal to massive audiences? But for a man who has been loyal to Ubisoft for a quarter century, who has spent 6 years working hand in glove with Nintendo and communicating with his inspiration Shigeru Miyamoto, to be potentially faced with straitened financial conditions and perhaps more limitations, could have been very difficult to swallow. This is, of course, pure speculation. It's very unlikely we will know too much more, as non-disclosure agreements and the etiquette of leaving a job probably mean that he will never be too open, even if there are negatives to disclose. But I think it doesn't take too much imagination to see that his position could have been quite difficult. Now, the options that are open to him are many. He could, of course, retire from the game industry. Aged only 51, it seems unlikely he would retire completely, but as a senior figure in Ubisoft for a long period of time, he might not need to stay in video games to earn his crust, although I would note a Glassdoor review of Ubisoft Milan states that the salary for presumably a lower level employee than Soliani was too low to live on in an expensive city like Milan. Irrespective, Davide Soliani's great track record and strong reputation has earned himself the freedom of choice. I am sure he will also have many opportunities from other development teams and studios, but this is a tricky situation, as many other studios are also in their own difficult financial situations. His final message, to the extent that it hints at anything, makes me think more that he could set up his own studio. To recap, he said, "Hi all folks, After 25 years, 11 of which beautifully spent working with Nintendo on Mario + Rabbids, along the company of our incredible community of players, I have decided to leave Ubisoft to embark on a new adventure. I can't say more now. Thanks a lot for everything, truly. Now, this could indicate a partnership with another studio, but the new adventure does suggest something a little bit more daring, a little bit more out on a limb than that. Setting up his own studio is absolutely a risk, but a celebrated game developer would likely be able to raise the financing necessary for something smaller scale, and it is likely that he has many contacts, not least from the hundreds of people Ubisoft has laid off, who could follow him into a venture like this. But the question that we started with is whether he will join Nintendo, or at least work with Nintendo again. Now, there is precedent with Nintendo finding a master collaborator and eventually bringing them in-house. Let us remind ourselves of the story of Mr. Hidemaru Fujibayashi. I have a full video on his history for anyone who wants more detail, but essentially, Fujibayashi-san was a Capcom employee who was tasked with directing the Zelda games for Capcom, including both Oracle's titles and the Minish Cap. It was a long time before Fujibayashi-san finally made the jump to working on Nintendo products, not until Spirit Tracks, but given his incredible track record with 2D Zelda on Capcom's side, it seems hardly surprising that he was able to come in from outside to a senior position in Nintendo, something a company like Nintendo with a long tradition of Kyoto-style craftsmanship and mentorship does not normally promote. And yet there are other examples besides. Most recently we learned that the Mario and Luigi team that went down with the ship over at Alpha Dream are still working and developing for Nintendo, or at least some of them are. We know from my recent deep dive that a few of the Mario and Luigi devs did find a home at Nintendo, or at least at Monolith Soft, but far, far more are at other companies in Japan, such as ILCA. Nevertheless, even if the senior figures weren't employed directly by Nintendo, the relationships remained, and it is these relationships that form the basis of Nintendo's business strategies, and surely these relationships that led to Mario and Luigi being returned to the release schedules in the form of the new Brothership game. This is why it is rare for Nintendo to seek to purchase companies outright. They know that the company in itself is just an empty shell, but it's the game developers who are crucial. Remember Satoru Iwata's comments on mergers and acquisitions back in 2008. He said, "We are not against mergers and acquisitions if Nintendo can absorb the real value of the company. However, in most cases, the value of software developing companies is attached to its people, not the company, which is merely a vessel for its people. So when we purchase a company, we can purchase the vessel, but we cannot necessarily purchase the contents. Even if we should compete with others to purchase a software company, although we might be able to increase the sheer number of our developers and to gain a short-term result, we do not think it will do good for us in the long run. We have been repeatedly saying that we will not do that kind of merger and acquisition." So I think Nintendo would be interested in having a very talented director on board, and we know they do recognise and give a lot of leeway to people they feel are extraordinarily talented. Check out Famicom Detective Club Emio the Smiling Man as an example of something that appears to be a passion project for one Yoshio Sakamoto. Absent Sakamoto-san's enthusiastic involvement, it's not clear to me that a niche franchise like Famicom Detective Club would ever get revived. And how many of these superstar developers do Nintendo really have on their books? All things considered, therefore, I think it is plausible that Nintendo would want to develop that relationship with Davide Soliani. However, aspirations are not the same thing as tangible reality. Soliani is unlikely to want to move out of Italy, I would imagine, and while Nintendo has a European base in Germany, the closest existing development team geographically from Nintendo is NERD, based in Paris, who are focused mainly on hardware innovations and developments around, for example, porting software over, such as working on the Nintendo Switch Online emulation services and the Super Mario 3D All-Stars games. For Nintendo to bring on board one talented individual is fine, but the days of the genius creator stringing together something in their bedroom is, while not gone, relegated more to indie titles like Stardew Valley and not a realistic approach for a big studio like Nintendo. Now, Soliani could assemble a team with Nintendo's blessing. I'm not aware that this has ever happened before, and it would involve an upfront cost for Nintendo, but clearly in some respects this would be the financially better move for Nintendo in the long term, as they would own the new studio, lock, stock and carpet track, and would have complete control. Surely then, if it's the financially logical move, then that's what Nintendo should do. I think not. And the reason I think not is Intelligent Systems. Again, I've deep dived Intelligent Systems in a separate video, so feel free to watch that to understand their background further. But Intelligent Systems is an example of a company with incredibly deep and long roots with Nintendo and responsibility for major series like Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, WarioWare and, back in the day, Advance Wars. Originally, the founder of Intelligent Systems was in fact a Nintendo employee, but Toru Narihiro branched off in the 80s to develop software tools and dev kits, and thus Intelligent Systems, a separate company, albeit one very geographically close to Nintendo, was born. Nintendo has had ample opportunities over the decades since to simply buy out Intelligent Systems, but why would they? Narihiro-san has been a fabulous development partner, and because he has a personal investment in his own company, Intelligent Systems has actually been incredibly loyal and committed to putting out Nintendo games. It feels unlikely that Paper Mario and Fire Emblem games will be quite so frequent if these were run out of Nintendo HQ directly, since there wouldn't be the same financial imperative to keep putting out title after title. But with a smaller company comes less financial flexibility to weather bad times and a greater reason to want to put games out. Now, that's fine if you want, let's say, Retro to keep working and working to perfect the next Metroid Prime without needing to necessarily produce a new game in the meantime, but generally Nintendo does want partners who are going to put out a steady flow of good games, and having some personal stake helps with this. Another example of this is the Monolith Soft buyout. Long-time Monolith Soft Supremos Takahashi, Sugiura and Hone still maintain a 4% stake in the company even after Nintendo bought the company out, elbowing even their close partners Bandai Namco out of the way to do so. This gave the three creative geniuses a real personal stake in the company, even if it was Nintendo owned. They respected the creators above all. And of course there are many companies that Nintendo could seek to buy out, but they don't need to. They don't need to purchase HAL or Mercury Steam or even Game Freak, although I will explore in a separate video soon some of the complexities around Pokemon ownership that may come to a head in the decade to come. All this makes me think that for Nintendo to be interested in a future relationship with Davide Soliani, he is going to need to have a base of people around him. But a senior creative director should have little problem in building a team like this. Now, once that new company is going, would Nintendo come in to purchase a major stake in it, Monolith Soft style? I think this is unlikely. Yes, they have a relationship with Davide, and this might swing their considerations, but they generally want to see that a company is well managed, and someone who has been a senior creative director, but ultimately in middle management from a financial point of view in a large multinational, might not be the most ideally suited person for managing a company. Now, Nintendo could undoubtedly put in support from their point of view, but they do not have strong experience in Milan, and they are not primarily in the business of trying to grow studios from scratch. My feeling is that they will want Soliani's new company, if indeed one exists, to grow and thrive on its own terms. And if, as with Alpha Dream, it fails, they can always try to reacquire those people who they like to work with as they find new employment in other studios. Frankly though, a contract with Nintendo for a new game, something I feel Soliani could easily attain given his past connections, would be support enough to get a fledgling studio on its feet without financial support. From there, it would be up to Soliani to get the people around him that he would need to make sure the studio remains solvent and successful. I don't think Nintendo will want to, or even really need to, put their thumbs on the scale under these circumstances. So even if a new studio is founded and a game is commissioned by Nintendo, what would we be seeing? Clearly, Mario + Rabbids is not going to be viable given that the Rabbids are owned by Ubisoft, and it would be legally tricky for Soliani to reconstitute the strategy style of those games in another original title. Not impossible, perhaps, if the creators of Banjo-Kazooie and the Chibi Robo franchise can branch off and create original concepts that are clearly tributes to their previous titles. Soliani could take the same approach. But it's a very different matter for a tiny studio to do this and for Nintendo to try and rupture relationships with, despite their recent local difficulties, one of their major game publishing partners. And Soliani is no one-trick pony. On Twitter, he once shared a screenshot and an anecdote about a Zelda pitch. He said, "Long ago, I guess it was 2003, me and Fabio Pagetti, the artist who made the pixel art below, almost convinced our managing director to let us produce a demo for a Game Boy Advance version of Wind Waker. No luck that time, but it was running nicely. We were dreamers." Realistically, how long would a conversation with Shigeru Miyamoto need to go before the concept of Soliani taking on Star Fox would come up? Nintendo is the Santa's Workshop of iconic video game franchises, and there's simply no need for a genius creator to retread a game he's put out twice before when there are so many new possibilities to explore. Even if his next game were in the strategy genre, a genre I love by the way, so I'd be very happy to see it, a game in the Zelda or even Splatoon universe could be very different. Personally, I've always thought a Splatoon tactics game, given the genius of the inking mechanics, could be an absolute game changer. Splatoon is already an incredibly tactical game by its nature, but a spin-off that doubled down on the tactics side of the ledger could be absolutely huge. So, let's get down to forecasting. First of all, would Soliani want to work with Nintendo? Clearly, given all his track record, given his obsession with Nintendo until now, yes, he would. Would Nintendo want to work with Soliani? Clearly, I think the answer to this is also yes, albeit perhaps a more cautious yes, as it would depend on his circumstances and his ability to deliver on a game that he was proposing. So I think it is likely that they will work together again. However, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and there could be all sorts of reasons why the stars don't quite align, and perhaps Soliani would rather have his own creator-controlled franchise, even as opposed to working on Nintendo's own characters. That's fair and perfectly understandable. Plus, just starting a project does not necessarily mean it ever releases. We might never find out about a project he's working on, and so it would be difficult to find out if the terms of the forecasts were met. I'm also skeptical about the fact that Soliani seems to be hinting at an announcement soon. I think it is unlikely that Nintendo would want to announce a partnership for a game so far off, but of course, the setting up of an independent studio would not necessitate Soliani revealing who has contracted them for work, and even if they did want to announce a Nintendo partnership, Nintendo might consider that they can relax their usual rules around this kind of thing for the benefit of allowing Soliani to hire not just for some Milan-based startup, but for a studio working with the mighty Nintendo. That has to be a benefit for efforts in recruiting new staff, and it was certainly something that Next Level Games promoted in their job specs long before they became a Nintendo studio themselves. Of course, even if Soliani is working with Nintendo, and even if we come to know about it, a game might not release anytime soon. So I would say there is a 90% chance that Soliani will work on a new game that will release by the end of 2030. I'd say there is a 70% chance that this will be a game in partnership, at least to some degree, with Nintendo, even if Nintendo are not themselves the publishers. However, with so many potential franchises for him to work on, I would put it at only 30% that he will be working on another Mario title, and it seems to me, given he has mentioned Zelda multiple times, there has to be a 10% chance at least that he will actually be working on a Zelda game. On the other side of the fence, the Mario plus Rabbids franchise is probably not completely done, given that it has been very successful for Ubisoft, but Ubisoft may now be far more skeptical about what they can actually do with it. It would not completely astonish me to see them trying to make something more of it, even if it's just doubling down on the existing two games by offering a double pack collector's edition of Kingdom Battles and Sparks of Hope on the next Nintendo console. But I'd say the chances of an original Mario plus Rabbids game by the end of 2030 are now no more than 30%, with some kind of Mario Plus Rabbids title, including reissues, at a slightly healthier 50%. However, while these forecasts represent the best I can do at this point in time, the forecast will be revisited as necessary in response to further news and developments. So if you think I'm off base here, or if you have a different take on events yourself, please do take to the comments. In the meantime, I'm going to show some of the videos I've mentioned on screen right now, and I will now just say take care, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.